Coming up on The Daily with me, Niall Paterson. As Axel Rudakubana is sentenced, what next for the survivors of Southport?
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kalnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts. Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kalnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Axel Rudakubana has been sentenced to a minimum of 52 years in prison. He may never leave. His crimes were murder, attempted murder, possession of a toxic agent, and material pertaining to terrorism. Yet, nowhere on the charge sheet did he face jail time for the trauma that so many are enduring thanks to his actions. And their pain was made clear in the victim impact statements read to the court. A pin drop that changed our lives forever, says the father of Alice da Silva Aguiar. Our life went with her. He took us too. The survivors and the families of those who lost their lives may have seen justice be done, but that alone doesn't end their pain. So, a little later on, I'll be asking a survivor of the Manchester Arena bombing, who herself works with traumatised children, if and how they can move on. Right, but let's start with what's actually been taking place in court, and just a warning that, as you'd expect, a lot of what will follow may upset you. Sky's Katerina Vittozzi has stepped outside the trial at Liverpool Crown Court. Katerina, just tell us what exactly it's been like in there.
It has been, for everyone in that courtroom, very harrowing, a very difficult and a really, really emotional day. Axel Rudakubana was brought in and almost immediately started shouting, saying, I feel pain, I don't feel well, I need to see a paramedic, I feel sick. And the judge did try and keep things going. At that time, the prosecution was speaking and it was outlining the details of what happened that day. And obviously the family are trying to hear, everyone in the courtroom is trying to hear, but you couldn't, because Axel Rudakubana, from the dock where he was sat, surrounded by officers and dock officers, he was just refusing to be quiet. And the judge tried to say to him, look, I understand that you have had a medical assessment this morning. It was deemed you were fit to be here. And then being more stern with him and saying, you have to be quiet. I am the person in charge of these proceedings, not you. However, Axel Rudakubana simply did not sit quietly. He was then asked to leave the courtroom, which he did. And as he left, the family members in the public gallery, you could see some were shaking their heads. One person shouted out, coward, because the judge then made clear that he believed Axel Rudakubana was voluntarily absenting himself from the courtroom, meaning there was no real medical reason for him not to be there, and he had chosen at that point to leave. So the day started off with that drama, really, to start with, before it even then got into the point of hearing the prosecution outline in detail the timeline of what happened that day, as well as show to the court some very, very distressing CCTV footage, dash cam footage from vehicles that were in the area outside the dance studio that day. And there were many points where the judge would pause things, the prosecution would pause and ask people, would you like to leave? Feel free to leave. Lots of people did. But some people felt like they wanted to still be in court to see and witness and hear what had happened to either them or to their loved ones. There were gasps as some of the CCTV footage was played out. In one particular clip, you could see after Axel Rudakubana had gone into the dance studio. You could hear within moments awful screams. It was really, really awful. You could hear those screams, and then you could see just a rush of young children coming out the door. And in one particular clip, you could see one little girl trying to escape and then him pulling her back in. And at that point, there was a gasp in the courtroom. I feel emotional even actually talking about it. There is something about seeing the footage firsthand that you can't really prepare yourself for it. And I am so in awe of the dignity and bravery of the family members who have been able to be in that courtroom today and watch that, because that is their family. These are their lives. And a difficult day for everyone to have to sit and see that.
We will never be able to understand the effect that the detail of this case will have on all of those concerned. The point of today was, given those guilty pleas from Rudakubana, to set out the detail of what happened. Did we learn much that was new from the prosecution?
A lot of the detail has already been outlined by the police in terms of the timeline and the sequence of things as we understand them that day. I think what was new today was a chance for people to see the enormous amount of evidence that was collected at the Rudakubana family home. Submitted into evidence were police photographs of weapons that he had within his bedroom at the family home that we understand was actually the living room of the family home. There was photographs of a pestle and mortar that they believe was used as he tried to produce the biological toxin ricin. Seeing body cam footage worn by police officers, seeing that in court, it just reinforced again how brave people were trying to protect the children, trying to get them out of the room or hide with them in the loo on the side of the studio and telling them to be quiet as they were hearing what was happening outside the door. But also the bravery of those people who tried to intervene, and to see firsthand on the CCTV footage captured outside that studio, to see the bravery of people that either weren't nearby or were just passing by as they rushed in to try and help or to try and stop him, was quite extraordinary.
And so many people, of course, have said that this case today needs to be focused not on the perpetrator, but on those who lost their lives. And of course, at times like this, the families of those who lost their lives. We've been hearing from them in terms of victim impact as well, haven't we?
The mother and father of Alice da Silva Aguiar were in the courtroom, and I think for them, like everyone else who was in court, to have started the day with Axel Rudakubana disturbing the proceedings, I think it robbed them perhaps of that initial opportunity to see him, and for him to hear the impact and the extent of what he had done and the effect it had had on them and their lives. But Alice da Silva Aguiar's parents, they're in court today, and having their impact statement read out on their behalf after having, sat in court and heard what their child would have seen and heard that day in those last few minutes of her life.
Alice was always a very kind girl who valued equality and fairness at the core. A world of possibilities awaited her, a best friend anyone could ask for. We were so lucky and privileged to have her. Every day felt like a gift. In a matter of minutes, our worlds were shattered and turned upside down by the devastating attack on our Alice. A pin drop that changed our lives forever. We kept our hopes up every second during Alice's 14-hour fight, but once she had lost her fight, we lost our lives. Everything stopped still, and we froze in time and space. Our life went with her. He took us too.
So that of course, the voice by an actor, we have been hearing from others, because there were certainly plenty of victims that day. We did learn a little bit more, didn't we, from the perspective of one of those most centrally involved, the teacher of this dance class.
Yes, we heard from Leanne Lucas, who was one of the teachers. She appeared in the evidence within the body cam footage, and you can see she's injured herself, but she's doing what she can to try and protect the children that had turned up to that workshop that day. and her words so powerful, so emotional, as she spoke of the impact that this has had on her and her life.
As a 36-year-old woman, I cannot stay in my own home alone. As a 36-year-old woman, I cannot go to work. As a 36-year-old woman, I cannot walk down the street without holding my breath as I bypass a person and then glance back to see if they've attempted to stab me. As a 36-year-old woman, I cannot enter a public place without considering how I will get out in the event of an emergency. As a 36-year-old woman, I cannot give myself compassion or accept praise, as how can I live knowing I survived when children died? The trauma of being both a victim and a witness has been horrendous. The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey. To discover that he had always set out to hurt the vulnerable is beyond comprehensible.
Does this feel like an end point for Southport, for the people of Southport, those directly and indirectly involved in it?
I wish I could say it was the beginning of a chance of healing for families and for the people in Southport, and for not only the people that saw and heard and were involved in that day, but even just for people who live in that area and, you know, perhaps had children that went to school with these children that were impacted. It's been such a traumatic event, of course, and I don't think anyone could ever fully understand what they're feeling. And I think what has been difficult for lots of the families is that over the course of the past few months and over the past few weeks is seeing so much of the attention they feel being on Axel Rudakubana, when they want it to be pivoted to the children that died, the children that were injured, the families that were affected. Maybe you could say the court hearing today will put a full stop at that process. Obviously, there will now be the public inquiry to come, announced by the Prime Minister, and the families have said that they welcome that. Of course, they have as many questions, or more questions, than any of us ever could. But the trauma is so deep. We spoke earlier this week, didn't we, about the fact that just in Southport town centre, you can see everywhere the names of the 3 children that died painted onto stones, which are now planted into the flower beds around the town centre. There are such vivid reminders everywhere of what happened, and just seeing the faces of the families there today and hearing the sobs as evidence was either read out or CCTV was shown, the grief is just unimaginable.
Thanks, Katerina. We'll be back in a moment to discuss how a community can move on after such horror. Those victim impact statements, they really do give you an idea of the horror that unfolded in Southport that day. Take the first girl to be attacked by Rudakubana. She thankfully survived. Well, she says she thinks about all the other children. I feel guilty I wasn't able to help them. Heidi Liddell, who helped run the dance class. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured him. Well, with the trial and his guilty verdict, it was perhaps inevitable that a lot of the focus would be on the killer. So let's instead turn to those who did survive and the broader community in Southport. Just how can they begin to start putting their lives back together? Dr Cath Hill is a lecturer in social work at Lancaster University. She and her son were at Manchester Arena the night of the bombing. In the aftermath, she led the Be the Difference project, focusing on the survivors of that night. Catholic, kind of drawing on both your personal and your professional experience, what do you think those linked to those attacks in Southport, what will they be feeling right now?
I know that this first year in particular is very, very difficult. It's a time when people are confused, can feel isolated, are trying to process what's happened. And so this is also made so much worse by the kind of obvious and needed but media attention that happens as well around the case. So there's a kind of continual need to kind of hear about what's happening and rethink about it, which can make people revisit it. So for children and young people, this can manifest in so many ways when they've experienced trauma. It will have absolutely undermined their sense of safety. for many young children, especially 9, 10-year-olds, they don't understand what extreme violence like this is. Most parents kind of shield their children from that, and quite rightly. So just even trying to understand and process what's happened is really, really difficult for young children. And yet with love and support and care, they can do that in time. So it's not all terrible used, but it will be a really difficult first few years for them.
When you say that the first year is difficult, that you are taken back to those traumatic events, just describe what that actually feels like and how that affects someone directly.
So that can affect people physically. So I know of young people that would come out in a rash or kind of the heart rate bounce, that kind of what we would describe as the fight and flight feeling comes back. So racing heart, feeling like you want to run away, want to escape. And it can manifest also in kind of sleeping and issues around eating, etc. And so there's the kind of physiological thing, but the psychological thing, really that sense of fear, losing your sense of safety. And I think for lots of young people, and we really saw this in the Be the Difference research that we did here at Lancaster University and with the National Emergencies Trust, is that it can really affect a young person's identity about who they feel that they are, because young people really rely on their friendship groups. And actually, if you've experienced something huge and so traumatic, then it's quite hard for some of those young people to integrate back into groups with children that obviously, thankfully, don't have that experience.
We've focused on younger people, on children up till this point. Understandable, and not least because of your own professional experience. But of course, there have been adults involved, first responders, those who are at the class themselves. I mean, is it a parallel experience for adults at times of this level of trauma?
Absolutely. Experiencing trauma is something that can affect everybody. And some of the differences with children relate to their development, of course. And actually, one of the issues that we found after Manchester, it was often parents and children who were both involved. So that was very difficult for parents to be actively finding support and trying to help their child while they were also traumatized. And then you have this difficult situation where some of the children don't want to speak to their parents about how they're feeling because they know that their parent is also traumatized. And what I would say for first responders, it's absolutely essential that they get the support that they need. There could have been many young, inexperienced police officers out dealing with that situation. And this isn't a traumatic event for them. And sometimes it's almost enough. Not everybody needs high-level intensive counselling. They just need to feel listened to and to be able to share their experiences.
But for those that do need it, what does that process look like, Cath? For young people as much as adults, of course.
This really came out clearly from the Manchester attack, where thousands of young people were affected, is our child and adolescent mental health system was already struggling. And so add in an influx of young people that have experienced a significant trauma, the system wasn't ready to support them. What I hope in Southport, and I did speak with some of the leads, including the mayor, who was saying that they were actually putting ring-fence targeted support in. Those young people don't need to be searching for help. It needs to be proactively offered to them. It needs to be at a time that suits them. We know that some young people, we saw this after Manchester, actually tried to just get on with their lives. But actually, it was a year later that actually these feelings resurfaced and they started to experience symptoms of PTSD. This is an ongoing process. Many of the young people that filled in our research talked about how this affected them or kind of re-affected them at different significant junctures in their life. So moving schools, going to high school, for example, going to university, finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend. That's when it kind of can resurface.
I do just want to bring in at this point, we of course have our correspondent Katerina, who has been covering the court case. She herself had a question that she wanted me to put to you, which I'm just going to play just for you now.
I was wondering whether you thought it was helpful and healing for the families of the 3 girls that died and for the victims who survived Axel Rudakubana's attack, for them to physically be in court today, for them to see him being sentenced. This wasn't something that the Manchester Arena victims got a chance to do in respect to Salman Abedi, because he died in that attack. And I wondered if there was a difference and if it was a helpful difference in terms of beginning to recover from this, for them to be able to see Rudakubana be sentenced and be put away in prison for a very, very long time.
What I do know from working with survivors of terrorism is that justice is important. And when that doesn't happen, that can be really problematic. And that can kind of prolong some of that kind of journey of trying to process and deal with this. So I think that justice is really important. What I would say is that the continual showing of these individuals and giving them any sort of fame is the wrong word, but any sort of notoriety can be really distressing. So actually what we really, I recall very, very clearly, the bereaved families at Manchester and other terror attacks felt really strongly that it is the loved ones that should be remembered, not those that have committed the crimes.
Thanks, Cath. And Katerina, you were just listening into that. What do you think?
She speaks both from experience and as someone that has spoken to many victims who've been through such horrendous trauma. I think once the events of today have been processed, I hope for the families that they can feel that their daughters are front and centre again, that Axel Rudakubana will be serving many, 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 many years in prison, and the memories and legacy of their children who lost their lives or those that were injured will be the thing that endures. And I suppose as parents, can they just hope that they can create a legacy which might make things better for other children in the future?
And that is your lot for this edition of The Daily. You can find even more detail of the case on skynews.com. We are back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.